Racist cop arrest black woman wedding day, but pee their pants when find out who the groom is. In this gripping and eye-opening video, we explore a shocking incident that unfolded on what should have been the happiest day of a woman's life, her wedding day. This story takes an unexpected turn when a racist police officer, driven by prejudice and bias, decides to arrest a black bride, interrupting her special moment. The reason behind this unjust arrest will leave you astounded and questioning the motives of those who are supposed to protect and serve. If you are enthusiastic about this narrative, please inform us. If you appreciated the video, press 1. If not, select 0. Your feedback genuinely motivates me to collect additional uplifting and significant narratives.
The warm rays of the early afternoon sun cast a gentle glow over the suburban streets as Alicia Evans navigated through the well-manicured roads. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. She was finally getting married to the man she loved, a man she had waited years for. The nerves that had built up over the past few weeks were now swirling in her stomach, but they were tinged with excitement. Her heart pounded with anticipation. She was almost there. In less than an hour. She would be standing at the altar, ready to commit her life to the man of her dreams. But at this very moment, as she drove, her thoughts were only on Michael. Alicia had always prided herself on being calm and collected, even in stressful situations. As a successful businesswoman who had fought her way to the top, she knew how to handle pressure. But today was different. Today wasn't about a boardroom, deadlines, or negotiations. Today was about love, about life, and about the future. The gorgeous white wedding dress she wore was custom-made, its elegant lace flowing down her figure perfectly. Her family had insisted on an extravagant wedding, and although Alicia usually preferred to keep things simple, today she had let herself indulge. After all, a woman only gets married once, right? She turned a corner and glanced at the clock. It was still early, but there was no room for error. She was running slightly ahead of schedule, but Alicia didn't want to take any chances. For Michael had been adamant that they both arrive separately to preserve the tradition of not seeing each other before the ceremony. It was one of those old-fashioned ideas that he cherished. Michael Evans, her soon-to-be husband, was the chief of police in their city. His reputation preceded him, tough but fair, beloved by his peers and respected by his subordinates. A man of integrity, a man of justice. But as much as Alicia admired him, there was a lingering sense of unease she had struggled to shake off throughout the day. Maybe it was the fact that she was driving Michael's prized vintage car. The sleek, black convertible was a statement piece, and Michael had warned her multiple times to drive carefully, especially with something so valuable. Or maybe it was something deeper, something that had little to do with the car and more to do with the day itself, the weight of what was to come, the enormity of this life-changing moment. Lost in her thoughts, Alicia almost didn't notice the flashing red and blue lights in her rear-view mirror until the sirens pierced through the quiet hum of the car. Her heart skipped a beat. She blinked, shaking her head in disbelief. Was she being pulled over? On her wedding day? In this dress? She eased the car to the side of the road, her hands tightening on the steering wheel. She took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. This was probably just a routine traffic stop. So maybe she had been speeding without realizing it, or maybe the officer was just checking on something minor. Still, Alicia couldn't help the knot of anxiety that twisted in her stomach. She had always been cautious around the police. Even though Michael was the chief, being a black woman, she was no stranger to the uneasy feeling that often came when encountering law enforcement. The patrol car rolled up behind her, and in the rearview mirror, Alicia saw the officer step out. He moved with purpose, his hand resting near his holster, his posture rigid. His face wasn't fully visible from where she sat, but she could feel the tension in the air already. She had dealt with many strong personalities in her life, but there was something about the energy of this officer that unsettled her. The officer approached the car, his footsteps slow and deliberate. Alicia glanced at the dashboard and then back at the rear-view mirror. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she wasn't about to let this minor inconvenience ruin her day. She rolled down the window just as the officer came to a stop beside the driver's rivesire. He was a tall, stern-looking man in his late 30s, his face hard and expressionless. His name tag read Collins. "License and registration," he barked, his tone sharp and devoid of any pleasantries. Alicia blinked, momentarily stunned by his abruptness. She had been expecting a more neutral greeting, perhaps even a polite exchange given the circumstances, but Collins didn't seem like the type to exchange pleasantries. His eyes flicked down at her wedding dress, and Alicia could see a flicker of something: suspicion, confusion, maybe even contempt. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her voice calm but laced with underlying tension. She knew how important it was to maintain control in situations like this. Alicia had been taught from a young age how to act around the police, how to keep her hands visible, how to speak politely and without resistance. Collins's eyes narrowed slightly. "License and registration," he repeated, his voice even sharper this time. "Is your car?" Alicia took a deep breath and reached for her purse, which was sitting in the passenger seat. "It belongs to my fiancé," she said, her fingers carefully pulling out her driver's license. "I'm driving it to our wedding." Collins's eyebrows lifted slightly, but his expression remained unreadable. He took the license from her, glanced at it briefly, and then handed it back. His eyes lingered on the dashboard and then on the interior of the car. It was clear he didn't believe her, or at the very least he wasn't convinced by her explanation. "Fiance, huh?" he said, his tone dripping with skepticism. "And I'm supposed to believe you're just out for a joyride in this expensive piece of work?" Alicia felt a small wave of irritation rise inside her, but she quickly pushed it down. This was not the time or place for a confrontation. "It's the truth," she said, keeping her voice steady. "I'm on my way to my wedding. You're welcome to call my fiancé Chief Michael Evans." For a brief moment, a flash of recognition crossed Collins's face at the mention of Michael's name, but it quickly disappeared. "We'll see about that," he muttered, before turning and walking back to his patrol car. Alicia watched him go, her hands tightening slightly on the steering wheel. This was not how she had envisioned spending the last few moments before her wedding. She glanced at the clock again. Time was ticking, and she was still several miles away from the venue. A sense of dread began to creep over her, though she tried to shake it off. Surely this was just a misunderstanding. Collins would verify the information and she would be back on her way. But something in the pit of her stomach told her it wasn't going to be that simple. As she waited, her thoughts raced. What if something went wrong? What if this was more than just a routine stop? She knew Michael would be livid if he knew what was happening right now. He had been so protective of her lately, so insistent on making sure everything went smoothly for the wedding. The last thing either of them needed was this. Minutes passed and Alicia felt her anxiety grow. Finally, Collins returned, but this time, his hand was resting on his holster. His face was hard, and his eyes were filled with a cold determination. "Step out of the car," he ordered, his voice devoid of any warmth. Alicia's heart sank. This wasn't right. She had done nothing wrong. But as she met Collins's icy gaze, she knew that things were about to take a very dark turn. Alicia stared at Officer Collins in disbelief as his words sank in. Step out of the car. This was escalating way too quickly. She had been through enough life experiences to recognize when a situation was spiraling out of control. But how had things gone so wrong so fast? She was simply driving to her wedding, yet now this officer was treating her like a suspect. Her heart thudded in her chest, but she kept her face composed. This was not the time to panic. She rolled her window down fully and spoke as calmly as possible, hoping to diffuse whatever it was that was happening. "Officer, I don't understand. Why do I need to get out of the car? I haven't done anything wrong." Collins's eyes narrowed even further, and he shifted his weight, his posture more aggressive. "I gave you a lawful order. Step out of the car," he repeated, his hand still dangerously close to his holster. His gaze bore into her, as if daring her to challenge him. The threat was palpable, and Alicia could feel the tension rising in the air between them. Alicia hesitated, glancing at the clock on the dashboard again. Every second she spent here was a second closer to being late for the wedding. "Michael will be worried," she thought, and her fingers itched to grab her phone and call him. But the officer was watching her every move. She had been in high-pressure situations before, but this was different. There was an air of danger surrounding this moment, one she couldn't quite shake off. "Officer," she began again, trying to remain diplomatic, "I'm on my way to my wedding. I haven't broken any laws. My fiancé is the chief of police, and I'm sure we can sort this out." "Now," Collins snapped, cutting her off sharply. "I'm not asking you again." His sudden outburst shocked her, and Alicia's instincts screamed at her to comply. She had heard too many stories about encounters like this that ended badly, especially for black people. Despite being a successful woman with connections and resources, despite knowing that her soon-to-be husband held one of the highest positions in law enforcement, she knew she wasn't immune to the dangerous consequences of a situation like this. Silently, Alicia unbuckled her seatbelt, taking a steadying breath before pushing open the car door. The soft rustle of her wedding dress against the leather seats seemed out of place in the tense atmosphere. Her dress caught slightly on the doorframe as she stepped out, and she felt a pang of frustration. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, but it was quickly turning into something else entirely. Collins stepped back, watching her every move with a scrutinizing gaze. His expression was one of suspicion and thinly veiled hostility, as if he had already decided she was guilty of something. But guilty of what? What crime could she possibly have committed by simply driving a car to her wedding? "Turn around and place your hands on the car," Collins instructed, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. Alicia's stomach churned. Was this really happening? "Excuse me?" she asked, genuinely taken aback. "You heard me," Collins said, his tone hard and unyielding. "I need to search you." Alicia's mind reeled. Search her? On what grounds? She hadn't done anything wrong, hadn't given him any reason to believe she was a threat. This was insane. "Officer," she started, trying to stay as calm as possible despite the rapid pulse pounding in her ears. "There's no reason to search me. I've told you I'm on my way to my wedding. I've done nothing wrong." But Collins wasn't listening. He took a step closer, his hand hovering over his holster. "Are you refusing to comply with a lawful order?" Alicia's breath caught in her throat. She had heard those words before, knew exactly what they meant. But it was a trap, the kind that could escalate into something much worse if she wasn't careful. She wasn't resisting, she was simply trying to reason with him. But reason wasn't working here. Collins wasn't interested in reason, he was interested in control. With a sigh, Alicia slowly turned and placed her hands on the cool metal surface of the car. Her heart pounded in her chest, the weight of her wedding dress feeling suffocating now. How had things gone so wrong? She had dreamed of this day for months, but now all she felt was a growing sense of dread. Collins patted her down roughly, his movements quick and impersonal. Alicia winced as he pulled at her dress, clearly not caring about the delicate fabric or the significance of the day. But when he found nothing, he stepped back, clearly unsatisfied but unwilling to admit he had no reason to suspect her in the first place. "Where are the car's registration papers?" he asked coldly. Alicia's voice wavered slightly, but she kept her tone controlled. "In the glove compartment." Without a word, Collins strode to the passenger side of the car and opened the door. He rummaged through the glove compartment, pulling out the papers and glancing at them with a furrowed brow. His expression darkened as he scanned the name on the registration, Michael Evans. Alicia watched him closely, hoping this would be the end of it, that once he saw her fiancé's name, he would let her go. But Collins's face only grew more rigid. "For Michael Evans," he repeated, as if testing the name on his tongue. "The chief of police, huh?" "Yes," Alicia confirmed, cautiously stepping away from the car and turning to face him. "I told you that." But Collins wasn't backing down. In fact, he seemed even more suspicious now. He stared at her for a long moment, his jaw clenched. It was clear that, for whatever reason, he didn't believe her. Or maybe he did, and it simply didn't matter to him. Alicia couldn't tell. "I'm going to need you to wait here while I run these papers," he said finally, his tone clipped and official. He turned on his heel and walked back to his patrol car, leaving Alicia standing there in the middle of the street, still in her wedding dress, still stunned by how quickly this situation had escalated. She glanced around, hoping to see someone nearby who could help, but the street was eerily quiet. The only sound was the low hum of the engine from her car and the distant chirping of birds. The peacefulness of the day felt at odds with the storm brewing inside her. She knew she should call Michael. He would sort this out in a second, but something held her back. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was the growing sense that she needed to handle this on her own. Michael couldn't always be there to protect her. The minutes dragged on as Collins sat in his patrol car, presumably running the registration. Alicia's mind raced with a million thoughts. What if she was late to the wedding? What if something else went wrong? She wanted to believe this would all be over soon, but deep down, she feared that things were about to get much worse. Finally, Collins stepped out of his car and walked back over to her, his expression hard and unreadable. "I ran the registration," he said curtly. "It checks out, but something's still not sitting right with me." Alicia blinked. "What do you mean?" Collins's eyes narrowed. "You don't belong in this car." Those words hit her like a punch to the gut. There it was, laid bare in the open, the real reason behind all of this. He didn't think she belonged, not because of her actions, but because of her skin color. Because she didn't fit the image in his mind of someone who should be driving such an expensive car, wearing such an elegant dress. "Officer, this is my fiancé's car," she repeated, her voice barely holding steady. "I'm driving it to our wedding." Collins stared at her for a long moment, the silence between them heavy and suffocating. Finally, he spoke. "Then we're going to need to talk to your fiancé." The tension between Alicia and Officer Collins was like a coiled spring ready to snap. Her pulse was racing now, her heart hammering in her chest, but she knew she couldn't afford to show any fear or frustration. Not with a man like him standing in front of her, a man whose authority had already twisted into something dangerous. His eyes were locked onto hers, scrutinizing every move she made, every word she said, as if waiting for the slightest slip-up to pounce on. The weight of the situation hung heavily in the air, and Alicia knew this was far from over. Collins's words echoed in her mind, "You don't belong in this car. The sheer arrogance of that statement. It wasn't just a matter of suspicion anymore, it was something personal. He wasn't investigating a potential crime. He was judging her based on the simple fact that she, a black woman, was driving a car he believed should be out of her reach. And it was an insult she had faced before, time and again in her life, but never like this, never on a day that was supposed to be about love and happiness. Officer, she began carefully, choosing her words with deliberate calm. There's no need for all of this. If you need to speak with my fiancé, we can call him right now, and this will all be cleared up. She reached for her phone, which was still tucked in her purse. Her hand had just brushed the fabric when Colin's voice snapped through the air like a whip. Keep your hands where I can see them. Alicia froze mid-motion. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her purse, but she didn't move further. She could hear the edge in his voice, the thin veneer of control slipping as his suspicions, or rather, his biases, took full form. Slowly she lifted her hands back into view, palms open and empty. I'm just trying to call my fiancé, she said evenly. You can speak to him directly. But Collins wasn't listening. His gaze flickered down to the purse for a split second before returning to her. He stepped closer, his body rigid, his hand resting near his holster again. It was a gesture she had come to recognize as a subtle but clear message. I am the one in control here. There's no need for that, he said, his voice a low, growling command. Step back, away from the vehicle. Alicia's eyes widened in disbelief. This was escalating far beyond anything she had anticipated. All she wanted was to get to her wedding, to get out of this nightmare. Yet here she was, on the side of the road, being treated like a criminal for no other reason than the color of her skin and the car she was driving. Her mind raced, weighing her options, but every scenario led to the same conclusion: she had to comply. Arguing, pushing back, even trying to reason with him could make things worse. And deep down, she feared exactly how much worse it could get. She stepped back, putting more distance between herself and the car. Her heels crunched against the gravel on the side of the road, her dress brushing lightly against the dirty pavement. The juxtaposition of her wedding attire in this hostile environment was surreal, almost absurd, and yet it was happening. Collins moved toward the driver's side, his eyes scanning the inside of the vehicle with more than just curiosity now. He seemed to be searching for anything to justify the escalating tension. He opened the driver's door, leaning in to inspect the interior. Alicia watched him closely, a mixture of anger and helplessness bubbling up inside her. This was her fiancé's car, for God's sake. He had every right to own it, and so did she. But Collins didn't see it that way. He didn't care about the facts, only the narrative he had already constructed in his mind. For a moment, Collins's hand paused over the dashboard. His fingers brushed something near the center console, and Alicia immediately recognized what it was: Michael's security system. It was a specialized piece of tech, something Michael had installed as part of his role as chief of police. It monitored the car's location, connected to encrypted networks, and allowed for emergency communication in case of any security issues. But it wasn't the kind of thing you'd find in just any car. Collins's suspicion flared as soon as he noticed it. "What's this?" he demanded, his tone taking on an accusatory edge. Alicia's heart sank. She had forgotten all about the system in her rush to get to the wedding. She opened her mouth to explain, but Collins cut her off before she could even form a sentence. "Some kind of hacking device," he snapped. "What are you involved in? Cybercrime? Stolen data?" The absurdity of his accusation hit her like a cold wave. Hacking device? Cybercrime? He was grasping at straws now, desperately trying to make something fit his twisted narrative. But Alicia wasn't about to let him continue without a fight. That's part of my fiancé's security system, she said, her voice sharper than she intended. He's the chief of police. It's standard issue for his position. Collins's eyes narrowed, his skepticism deepening. Chief of police or not, this doesn't sit right with me. You expect me to believe you're just driving around in this car with this? Alicia could feel the frustration boiling up inside her, threatening to spill over. This wasn't just about a traffic stop anymore. This was about power, about control, and about proving her innocence in a situation where she had done absolutely nothing wrong. The injustice of it all weighed heavily on her, and she struggled to keep her voice even. I don't need you to believe me, she said firmly. Just call my fiancé. He'll confirm everything. But Collins wasn't listening. He was already moving past the security system, his attention shifting to the glove compartment, the center console, even the seats. It was clear he was determined to find something, anything that could justify his actions. And when he couldn't find it, his frustration only grew. I'm going to need you to come with me, he said finally, stepping back from the car and turning his full attention to Alicia. Alicia's breath caught in her throat. Come with you? To where? To the station, Collins said coldly. Until we can sort all this out. The word sent a chill down her spine. Go to the station. Was he serious? She hadn't committed any crime. There was no reason for any of this. And yet here he was, standing before her, ready to take her in as if she were some sort of criminal. She could feel the panic rising in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. Panicking wouldn't help. She needed to think, to act rationally, even if everything about this situation felt utterly irrational. Officer, she began slowly, trying one last time to appeal to whatever shred of reason he might still have. This is a misunderstanding. I'm on my way to my wedding. My fiancé. I've heard enough about your fiancé, Collins snapped. Now turn around and put your hands behind your back. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Alicia stared at him, her mind struggling to process what he had just said. Was he really about to arrest her? Her hands instinctively went to her sides, gripping the fabric of her dress. She had done nothing wrong. She hadn't resisted, hadn't lied, hadn't broken any laws. And yet here she was, being told to put her hands behind her back like a common criminal. Officer, please, she said, her voice cracking slightly. This is my wedding day. I'm not a criminal. I just... Now, Collins ordered, his voice colder than before. Alicia hesitated for only a second longer before slowly turning around, her movements heavy with disbelief. This couldn't be happening. Not today. Not like this. She felt the soft fabric of her wedding dress brush against her legs as she turned, the delicate lace now feeling like a prison. Her arms moved behind her back, and the moment her wrists met, she felt the cold, unforgiving touch of metal. The click of the handcuffs was deafening in the silence. Collins stepped forward, his hands firm but rough as he secured the cuffs around her wrists. Alicia winced at the pressure, but she didn't resist. There was no point. She was completely at his mercy now, and the realization hit her like a ton of bricks. She was being arrested, on her wedding day, for nothing. As Collins led her back to his patrol car, Alicia's mind raced. She had to get in touch with Michael. He would know what to do. He would fix this. But her phone was still in her purse, and Collins had left it behind in her car. Our door closed with a dull thud, and she found herself sitting in the back of the patrol car, her wrists bound behind her back, her wedding dress crumpled awkwardly beneath her. Collins got into the driver's seat without a word, and the engine roared to life. Alicia stared out the window, the world outside blurring as they pulled away from the side of the road. The church, the wedding, her future, it all seemed so far away now, like a dream slipping through her fingers. She was trapped in a nightmare, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The patrol car's engine hummed steadily as they drove through the city streets. The world outside seemed to move in slow motion for Alicia, though her mind was racing. Her wrists, bound by the cold metal handcuffs, ached slightly as she shifted in the back seat. She glanced down at her wedding dress, now crumpled and dirty from being pressed against the seat in the small patrol car. The pristine white lace and delicate details that once symbolized joy and love now felt like a cruel irony, a constant reminder that her perfect day was unraveling right in front of her eyes. Alicia's thoughts kept circling back to Michael. He had no idea what was happening, and that was what terrified her the most. He would be waiting at the church, expecting her to walk down the aisle, not knowing that she was being driven to the police station in handcuffs. The sinking feeling in her stomach grew heavier with each passing minute. How did this happen? How had a simple traffic stop turned into this nightmare? She stared at Officer Collins's back as he drove, his posture stiff and unyielding. He hadn't said a word since they left the roadside, but the silence was suffocating. Every once in a while, he would glance at her through the rearview mirror, but his expression remained hard, cold. There was no sign of remorse, no second-guessing his actions. In his mind, she was already guilty. But of what? Alicia didn't even know anymore. Her hands clenched into fists behind her back as she tried to calm herself. Michael will fix this, she told herself again and again. But the thought was starting to lose its power. What if something went wrong at the station? What if they refused to believe her? Even when Michael got involved, her heart pounded in her chest, and she took a deep breath, trying to center herself. She had to stay focused, had to think clearly. Panic wouldn't help her now. The patrol car turned down a quieter street, and Alicia recognized the direction they were heading toward the downtown precinct. She had been there before, but always on her own terms, visiting Michael when his work hours bled into the night. And never like this, though. Never as a prisoner in the back of a police car. As they neared the station, Alicia noticed two black SUVs parked just ahead. They were sleek and nondescript, blending in with the other cars on the street, but something about them caught her eye. There was a faint, almost imperceptible insignia on one of the SUVs, the same one she had seen on her fiancé's vehicles. Her heart leapt. Could it be Michael's security detail? Were they already looking for her? Collins didn't seem to notice the SUVs as he pulled into the station's parking lot and brought the patrol car to a stop. He climbed out without a word, moving around to the back to open her door. Alicia's pulse quickened. This was her moment. She had to make him understand that her fiancé was nearby, that this was all a mistake. As soon as Collins opened the door, Alicia spoke, her voice steadier than she expected. "Officer Collins, my fiancé is the chief of police. His security team is nearby those SUVs you just passed. If you let me call him, this can all be resolved right now." Collins froze for a moment, the muscles in his jaw twitching as he processed her words. His eyes flicked briefly toward the SUVs in the distance, but his expression didn't soften. Instead, a look of frustration crossed his face, and he yanked her out of the car roughly. "We'll handle this at the station," he muttered through gritted teeth. Alicia stumbled slightly as she stood, the sudden motion sending a sharp pain through her wrists. She was too stunned to react, too overwhelmed by the situation to fight back. Her mind raced. Why was Collins so determined to ignore everything she was telling him? Why was he so set on treating her like a criminal, even when the truth was right in front of him? As Collins marched her toward the entrance of the station, Alicia cast one last glance at the SUVs. There were people inside watching. She couldn't see them clearly, but she could feel their eyes on her. And then, as if in response to her silent plea for help, the engine of one of the SUVs roared to life. Collins jerked her forward, pulling her toward the station doors just as the black SUV sped toward them. The tires screeched as the vehicle came to a sudden stop directly in front of the station. Before Alicia could fully comprehend what was happening, the door of the SUV swung open, and a figure stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, and exuding an air of authority. It was Michael. For a moment, everything else faded away. The fear, the anger, the confusion, it all melted into relief at the sight of him. Michael was here. He would fix this. He would stop this nightmare from getting any worse. Let her go. Michael's voice boomed across the parking lot, sharp and commanding. Collins froze mid-step, his hand still gripping Alicia's arm. His face paled slightly, and for the first time since the encounter began, Alicia saw a flicker of doubt cross his face. He turned slowly toward the source of the voice, his expression hardening as he recognized the man standing in front of him. Michael strode toward them, his eyes blazing with fury. He was still in his dress uniform, the dark navy fabric crisp and immaculate, the badge on his chest gleaming in the sunlight. His jaw was clenched and his hands were balled into fists at his sides. Alicia had seen him angry before, but never like this. "Chief Evans," Collins said stiffly, though his grip on Alicia's arm loosened slightly. I said let her go," Michael repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. Collins hesitated for a split second before finally releasing Alicia's arm. She stumbled forward slightly, catching herself before she fell. Her eyes met Michael's, and she could see the mixture of relief and anger swirling in his gaze. Without another word, Michael stepped between her and Collins, his presence a protective barrier against the officer who had caused this mess. Alicia felt her pulse slow, her heart rate returning to something close to normal. She was safe now. She knew that. But Michael wasn't done. "Take off those cuffs," he demanded, his voice low but seething with barely controlled rage. Collins fumbled for a moment, his hands shaking slightly as he reached for the key. His face was blushed with embarrassment, and he avoided looking Michael in the eyes as he unlocked the handcuffs. The cold metal fell away from Alicia's wrists, and she flexed her hands, wincing at the soreness. She rubbed her wrists gently, her fingers tracing the red marks left behind by the cuffs. The silence that followed was thick with tension. Collins stepped back, his eyes darting between Alicia and Michael, clearly unsure of what to do next. He opened his mouth to say something, maybe an apology, maybe an excuse, but Michael cut him off before he could speak. "You'll answer for this," Michael said, his tone flat, devoid of emotion. But there was no mistaking the promise of consequences in his words. "Get back inside." Collins's face reddened even more, but he nodded quickly, muttering something under his breath before turning and walking back toward the station. Alicia watched him go, her heart still racing from the adrenaline. She wanted to scream, to shout, to demand to know why any of this had happened in the first place. But she stayed silent, letting the moment pass, letting the anger settle. When Collins disappeared into the station, Michael turned to face her fully. His expression softened slightly, and he reached out, gently cupping her face in his hands. His thumbs brushed away a tear that Alicia hadn't even realized had fallen. "I'm so sorry, Alicia," he murmured, his voice raw with guilt. "I should be there. This never should have happened." Alicia shook her head, her voice trembling slightly as she spoke. "It's not your fault, Michael. You couldn't have known." He pulled her into a tight embrace, holding her as if he were afraid to let her go. The warmth of his body against hers was comforting, grounding her in the moment, pulling her away from the chaos of the past hour. But even as she leaned into him, the reality of what had just happened lingered in the back of her mind. Collins's words still echoed in her ears. The way he had looked at her, the way he had judged her, all of it was a reminder of the world they lived in. A world where, even as the fiancée of the chief of police, she was still just another black woman in the eyes of men like Collins. She pulled back slightly, looking up at Michael. "What happens now?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael sighed, his brow furrowing with frustration. "I'll deal with Collins. He's going to face disciplinary action. There's no excuse for what he did." Alicia nodded, though the anger inside her hadn't fully dissipated. "I'm not just going to let this go, Michael. It can't just be swept under the rug." Before Michael met her gaze, his expression serious. "I know. We'll make sure it isn't." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of everything that had happened still hung between them, unspoken but heavy. But there was also a sense of relief, a sense that, at least for now, the worst was over. Alicia took a deep breath, finally allowing herself to relax as Michael led her toward the waiting SUV. They still had a wedding to get to, and though it wouldn't be the perfect day they had envisioned, they would get through it together. As the SUV pulled away from the station, Alicia stared out the window, her thoughts swirling like a storm. The city blurred past her, but she couldn't focus on anything outside the glass. All she could think about was how close she had come to being dragged into a situation that could have ruined everything: her wedding, her future, and maybe even her life. No matter how many times Michael had reassured her in the car, that raw knot of anxiety wouldn't unravel. The anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface, along with the lingering shock of being treated like a criminal on what should have been the happiest day of her life. Beside her, Michael sat in silence. His hand rested on her knee, offering comfort without words, but she could feel the tension in his body, the way his jaw clenched whenever the SUV hit a bump in the road. She could tell that this had shaken him just as much as it had shaken her. Maybe more. He was a man used to being in control, to solving problems before they even had the chance to escalate. But today he had been powerless, and that, she knew, was eating away at him. They were heading back to the church, but Alicia couldn't shake the sense that this day had already been tainted beyond repair. The idea of walking down the aisle after everything that had happened felt surreal, almost impossible. Her wrists still ached from the handcuffs, and the memory of Collins's cold, accusatory voice lingered in her mind like a bad dream. How could she just brush it off, pretend like nothing had happened, and step into a moment that was supposed to symbolize love and unity? The SUV slowed as it neared the church, the tall spires coming into view against the backdrop of a clear, sunny sky. People were milling around outside, guests in their best attire, all smiles and anticipation. But Alicia felt none of that joy now. She felt distant, like she was watching someone else's wedding unfold. It didn't feel real anymore. The car came to a stop, and Michael turned to her, his eyes full of concern. "Alicia, we don't have to do this right now," he said softly. "If you're not ready, we can postpone it. I know today's been hell." Alicia looked at him, her heart aching at the sight of his worry. She knew he would call the whole thing off in a second if she asked him to. But postponing the wedding wouldn't change what had happened. It wouldn't erase the injustice she had just endured. And in a way, she didn't want to give Collins or anyone like him the power over her. She had fought too hard in her life to let one man's prejudice derail her happiness. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "No, she said firmly, though her voice wavered slightly. "We're getting married today. I'm not letting the man take this from me." So Michael studied her for a moment, his eyes searching hers before he nodded. "Okay," he said quietly, "if that's what you want." Alicia nodded, though inside she still felt like she was standing on shaky ground. She could feel the weight of the day pressing down on her, and as much as she wanted to be strong, to reclaim the joy of her wedding day, it was hard to push the fear aside. One of Michael's security team members opened the door for her, and she stepped out of the SUV, her wedding dress brushing the pavement as she did. The crisp white fabric was a stark contrast to the dark thoughts swirling in her mind. She took a moment to smooth out the wrinkles, trying to collect herself. Michael came around the car to stand beside her, and together they walked toward the church. As they reached the steps, a low murmur rippled through the crowd of guests. They had no idea what had just happened, no idea that Alicia had been moments away from being wrongfully detained. To them, this was still a picture-perfect wedding day, but to Alicia, it was anything but. Inside the church, the air was cool and still, a welcome contrast to the chaos outside. The soft sound of the organ music filled the space, echoing off the high-vaulted ceilings. It should have been calming, but Alicia's nerves were still frayed, her mind still racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that something else was going to go wrong. As they moved further into the church, Alicia caught sight of her maid of honor, Danielle, standing near the front. Danielle had been her rock throughout the entire wedding planning process, and Alicia felt a surge of gratitude seeing her there, her face full of concern as she spotted Alicia. "Are you okay?" Danielle asked as soon as she reached them, her voice low but urgent. "You look shaken." Alicia forced a smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "It's been a rough morning," she admitted, not wanting to get into the details right now. There would be time to tell Danielle everything later, but right now, she just needed to focus on getting through the ceremony. Danielle gave her a knowing look but didn't press further. Instead, she squeezed Alicia's hand reassuringly. "You've got this," she said softly. "I'm here if you need anything." Alicia nodded, though the weight of the day still sat heavy on her shoulders. She looked around the church, at the rows of guests waiting expectantly, and for a brief moment she considered calling the whole thing off after all. But then she felt Michael's hand on her back, steady and warm, and she knew she couldn't back down. Not now. The ceremony began, the soft murmur of the officiant's voice blending with the quiet music. But as Alicia stood there, holding Michael's hands and reciting her vows, she couldn't shake the images of Collins from her mind. The way he had looked at her, the way he had assumed the worst of her without even bothering to listen. The injustice of it all gnawed at her, distracting her from the words she was supposed to be speaking. By the time they reached the end of the ceremony, Alicia felt like she was on autopilot. The applause from the guests was loud and joyful, but she barely registered it. All she could think about was the feeling of those handcuffs around her wrists, the cold metal biting into her skin. As Michael leaned in to kiss her, sealing their vows, she felt a wave of relief that it was finally over, but also a deep, simmering anger that wouldn't go away. The reception was in full swing, the music lively, the guests laughing and dancing. But Alicia couldn't bring herself to join in. She stood at the edge of the room, watching as her friends and family celebrated, but feeling completely disconnected from it all. Michael had been pulled into a conversation with one of his colleagues, and though he kept glancing at her, concern etched into his features, she waved him off, not wanting to pull him away. Her phone buzzed in her hand, and Alicia glanced down at the screen. It was a text from Danielle. "I'm worried about you. You sure you're okay?" Alicia sighed, typing a quick response. "I'm fine. Just need some air." She slipped out of the reception hall and onto the balcony, the cool night air a welcome change from the stifling atmosphere inside. She leaned against the railing, letting the quiet of the night wash over her. But even the peaceful surroundings couldn't quiet the storm inside her. The memory of what had happened with Collins replayed in her mind over and over. No matter how hard she tried to push it aside, it kept coming back. The look in his eyes, the way he had dismissed everything she said, the way he had treated her like she was nothing, it haunted her. A sound behind her made her turn, and she saw Danielle stepping onto the balcony, a look of concern still on her face. "Hey," Danielle said softly. "I figured you'd be out here." Alicia smiled weakly. "I just needed a minute." Danielle came to stand beside her, leaning against the railing as well. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence between them comfortable but heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Danielle broke the silence. "You want to talk about it?" Alicia hesitated. She hadn't planned on telling Danielle everything tonight. She didn't want to bring that darkness into the wedding celebration. But at the same time, she knew she couldn't keep it bottled up inside forever. "I was almost arrested this morning," Alicia said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Danielle turned to her, her eyes wide with shock. "What? Why?" Alicia let out a bitter laugh. "Because I was driving Michael's car, and because I'm black." Danielle's expression shifted from shock to anger. "Are you serious? Who was the cop?" Alicia nodded. "Some guy named Collins. He stopped me, wouldn't listen to anything I said, and ended up cuffing me. He was going to take me to the station before Michael showed up." "Jesus," Danielle muttered, running a hand through her hair. "Alicia, I'm so sorry. That's awful." Alicia nodded, feeling the weight of it all pressed down on her again. I can't stop thinking about it. I know I should be focusing on the wedding, on Michael, but I can't shake it. The way he looked at me, like I didn't belong, like I was guilty just for existing." Danielle reached out, taking Alicia's hand in hers. "You do belong, Alicia. Don't ever let anyone make you feel like you don't, especially not some asshole with a badge." Alicia smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I know, it's just hard." "I get it," Danielle said softly, "but you're strong. You're tougher than anyone I know. You'll get through this." Alicia squeezed Danielle's hand, grateful for her friend's support. But even as Danielle spoke, Alicia knew that getting through this wouldn't be as simple as just letting it go. What had happened today wasn't something she could just brush off. It was part of a larger, deeper problem, one that she had been aware of her entire life, but had never hit so close to home. She had always known that being a black woman in this world came with certain dangers, certain biases, but today had been a brutal reminder of just how far those biases could go, even when you were engaged to a man in one of the highest positions of power. Alicia took a deep breath, steeling herself. This wasn't over. Collins wasn't going to get away with what he had done. Not this time. She was going to make sure of that. Alicia stood at the edge of the reception hall, her eyes scanning the room as the guests continued to dance and laugh, oblivious to the storm brewing inside her. She had held it together through the ceremony, through the vows and through the smiles and congratulations. But now, as the night wore on, the weight of everything that had happened earlier pressed down on her chest like a stone. No amount of reassuring words from Michael, no soothing glances from Danielle, could erase the feeling of injustice that pulsed through her veins. Her mind kept flashing back to that moment on the side of the road, Collins's cold eyes staring her down as if she were nothing. The powerlessness she had felt in that instant was something she hadn't experienced in years, not since before she had built the life she had now. A successful career, a loving fiancé, respect from her community, none of it had mattered in that moment. She had been reduced to just another black woman in the eyes of that officer, and it enraged her. But it wasn't just the personal insult that burned inside her. It was the knowledge that what had happened to her wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a much larger problem, one that had been festering in the shadows for far too long. She had always known it was there, but today it had come for her directly, and now she couldn't ignore it any longer. Michael approached her quietly, his eyes full of concern. He had been watching her all evening, sensing her distance, her distraction. He knew what was on her mind, how could he not? But he hadn't pushed, giving her the space she needed to process everything. "You okay?" he asked softly, standing beside her as they looked out at the crowd together. Alicia didn't answer right away. Instead, she took a deep breath, steadying herself. She had been holding on to this decision for hours, wrestling with it, unsure if she was ready to take the next step. But now, standing here with Michael beside her, she knew she couldn't wait any longer. "No," she said finally, her voice low but firm. "I'm not okay, Michael, and I can't pretend that I am." Michael turned to face her fully, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" Alicia met his gaze, her eyes filled with determination. What happened today with Collins, it wasn't just some mistake. It wasn't just a bad cop having a bad day. It was racism. Plain and simple, and I just moved past it. Not this time. Sir Michael nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. He had always known that his position as chief of police came with certain responsibilities, but this was different. This was personal. "I know," he said quietly, "and I'm going to deal with him, I promise." Alicia shook her head, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "It's not just about Collins. It's about the whole system. You know as well as I do that this kind of thing happens all the time. And it's not going to stop just because one officer gets a slap on the wrist. This has to be bigger than that." Michael sighed, rubbing the back of his neck as he considered her words. "What are you suggesting?" Alicia's heart pounded in her chest as she took a step closer to him, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Do we need to go public with this?" Michael blinked, surprised by her suggestion. "Public? Alicia, that could." "I know what it could do," she interrupted, her tone firm but not angry. "I know it could put us in the spotlight. I know it could make things difficult for you at work. But we can't let fear stop us from doing what's right. People need to know what's happening in their own city, and we have the power to shine a light on it." Michael was silent for a long moment, his eyes searching hers. She could see the wheels turning in his mind, weighing the risks, considering the consequences. She knew he was worried about what this would mean for his career, for their life together. But she also knew that he was a man of integrity, a man who believed in justice just as much as she did. Finally, he exhaled, nodding. "You're right," he said softly. "We can't keep this quiet. People need to know." Alicia felt a surge of relief wash over her, but it was quickly followed by a sense of purpose. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about every person who had ever been mistreated, dismissed, or dehumanized by a system that was supposed to protect them. This was about making sure that no one else had to go through what she had gone through today. "But we'll need to gather everything," she said, her mind already racing with plans. "The bodycam footage, the records of the stop, everything. We'll talk to the press. We'll make sure this gets out." Michael nodded again, though she could see the tension in his shoulders. He was committed now, but she knew this wasn't going to be easy for him. going up against his own department, exposing the corruption and racism that had been festering within it for years. It was a monumental task, but it was one he was willing to take on, for her and for the greater good. Alicia reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "Thank you for standing with me." He squeezed her hand in return, his eyes softening as he looked at her. "Always." For a moment they stood there in silence, the weight of their decision settling between them. It wasn't going to be easy. There would be backlash both from the department and from the public. But Alicia knew that they were doing the right thing, and that was what mattered. As they turned to head back into the reception hall, Alicia felt a renewed sense of determination. She wasn't just a bride today. She was a fighter, and she wasn't going to let this injustice go unanswered. But as they rejoined the crowd of guests, something caught Alicia's eye, a figure standing near the entrance, watching them intently. Her breath caught in her throat as she recognized him. It was Collins. He was out of uniform now, dressed in plain clothes, but there was no mistaking the hard set of his jaw, the cold glint in his eyes. He wasn't supposed to be here. How had he even known where the reception was? Alicia's hand tightened around Michael's as she glanced toward the door. "Michael, look," she whispered. So Michael followed her gaze, his expression darkening as he saw Collins. "What the hell is he doing here?" he muttered under his breath, already moving toward the door. But before they could reach him, Collins turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. Alicia's pulse quickened. Something wasn't right. Why had he come here? Was he trying to intimidate them? Was this his way of sending a message? She exchanged a worried glance with Michael, who looked just as unsettled. "We'll deal with him," Michael said, his voice firm. "But not tonight. Tonight is about us." Alicia nodded, though the unease lingered. They may have made the decision to go public, but now it was clear that Collins wasn't going to let them do it without a fight. As they returned to their guests, Alicia couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. The days that followed the wedding were anything but peaceful. Alicia had hoped that once she and Michael made the decision to go public, there would be a sense of relief that by speaking out, they would begin the process of healing and seeking justice. But instead, the pressure only mounted. The moment their story hit the media, it spread like wildfire. The bodycam footage of Officer Collins's unjust treatment of Alicia during the traffic stop was aired on every major news outlet. Her pristine wedding dress, her calm but determined demeanor, and Collins's aggressive stance became the center of a heated national debate about race, power, and police misconduct. People were angry, some in support of Alicia and Michael, others defending the actions of the police. What Alicia hadn't anticipated was how deeply this would affect not just her, but Michael as well. The backlash from within the police department was swift. Michael had always been respected by his colleagues, but now some viewed him as a traitor. He was the chief, after all, the man responsible for protecting the integrity of the force. By exposing one of their own, he had disrupted the unspoken rule of loyalty, and that loyalty was turning against him. "Maybe we shouldn't have gone public so soon," Michael admitted one evening as they sat together at home, the flicker of the television casting shadow on their faces. His voice was calm, but Alicia could hear the strain behind it. "I knew there'd be consequences, but it's worse than I thought." Alicia turned to him, her eyes soft but resolute. "Michael, we did the right thing. We couldn't just let Collins get away with it. If we had stayed silent, we'd be complicit in the same system we're trying to change." Michael rubbed his temples, nodding slowly. "I know. It's not just Collins anymore. The whole department is on edge. They're questioning my leadership, wondering if I'll expose more. It's not easy to lead when your own people don't trust you. Alicia placed a hand on his knee, squeezing gently. They'll come around. The ones who stand for justice will, and the ones who don't. Well, maybe this is the shake-up they need. Sometimes change requires breaking the status quo. And he looked at her, a tired smile tugging at his lips. I just wish I knew how to fix it. Alicia returned the smile, leaning her head on his shoulder. You're already doing that. Change doesn't happen overnight. But even as she said the words, Alicia knew the weight of their decision was taking its toll. The phone calls from reporters never seemed to stop. Every morning, their inboxes were flooded with messages, some of support, others full of vitriol. And then there were the threats. Anonymous messages from people who saw Michael's actions as betrayal, or who simply wanted to scare them into silence. But Alicia refused to be scared. She had made her choice, and she wasn't going to back down now. Not when they were so close to real change. One morning, as she sat at the kitchen table, sipping her coffee, her phone buzzed with a text. She glanced at the screen and froze. It was a message from Danielle. Collins is gone. Resigned this morning. No statement. Alicia's heart skipped a beat. Collins had resigned. Without a fight, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt strange, almost anticlimactic. After everything he had done, all the hostility and aggression, he was simply walking away. She immediately forwarded the message to Michael, who was already at the station. A few minutes later, her phone rang. It's true, Michael said on the other end of the line. Collins resigned first thing this morning. He cleared out his desk and left without a word. Alicia sat back in her chair, processing the news. What do you think it means? Is this his way of avoiding accountability? Michael sighed. Maybe. Or maybe he realized there was no way out. The pressure was building. The investigation was turning up evidence of misconduct, not just with you, but with other cases too. He knew he was done. Alicia nodded, though the hollow feeling in her chest remained. It just feels unfinished. I know, Michael said softly. But we did what we set out to do. We exposed him. And now the department is undergoing a full review of its practices. It's not the end, but it's a start. Alicia's fingers drummed lightly against the table, her mind spinning. Collins was gone, but the system that had allowed him to operate the way he did was still very much in place. There was so much more work to be done, but for now, maybe this was enough. Later that evening, as the sun began to set, Alicia and Michael sat on the balcony of their home, the warm glow of the twilight casting a peaceful light over the city. It had been a long few weeks, but for the first time in what felt like ages, Alicia allowed herself to relax, even if just for a moment. She turned to Michael, who was staring out at the horizon deep in thought. What's on your mind? She asked, her voice soft. He smiled slightly, shaking his head. Just thinking about how everything has changed, how much more there is to do. But I'm glad we did this, Alicia. I'm glad we stood up. Alicia smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. So am I,